It's funny how karma wears a white uniform sometimes. The last person I expected to see on her knees in front of me at 6 a.m. in the hospital's quiet hallway was the woman who once called me mediocre. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, brilliant, ruthless, and unbearably beautiful, my old psychology professor at Stanford. Back then she didn't just teach, she ruled. Her words could build or destroy a student's future. And mine she tried to destroy with a single sentence. You don't have what it takes to help people, Miss Torres. You're too emotional. I remember walking out of her office that day, heart shattered, vowing to prove her wrong. But what I never imagined was that the day she'd finally admit her mistake, I'd be the one wearing scrubs, and she'd be the one in tears. When Eleanor walked into the ER that morning, she looked nothing like the untouchable woman I once knew. Her hair, usually sleek and perfect, was messy, sticking to her damp cheeks. Her eyes were red-rimmed, the kind of red that comes from nights without sleep. Lila. She whispered my name like it was a prayer and a curse all at once. I froze, the sound of her voice dragging me years back to the lecture hall where she humiliated me in front of 100 students, to the way her cold gaze made me shrink. My heart thudded against my ribs, old scars bleeding in places I thought had healed. Dr. Hayes, I said, my tone colder than the stainless steel counters around us. You shouldn't be here. She flinched, as if the title itself, that sterile Dr. Hayes, had become a knife. I had to see you, she said, voice trembling. Please, just hear me out. The nurses passing by slowed, pretending not to stare. I hated that kind of scene, emotion spilling out in a place that was supposed to be professional. But I also hated how my chest tightened seeing her like this, broken and small. She used to be untouchable. Now she looked like someone who'd lost everything. 5 minutes, I muttered, nodding toward the staff room. Then you leave. Inside, the fluorescent light buzzed softly. I crossed my arms, watching as Eleanor tried to steady her breathing. Her hands were shaking. I had seen that before, not from her, but in patients who had faced unbearable loss. I didn't know where else to go, she began. My mother, she's in ICU. Stage 4 lung cancer. The doctors say. I know, I interrupted. I'm one of the nurses on her case. Her lips parted slightly. You're the one taking care of her. Yes, I said flatly. So if you came here to pull rank or make demands, don't bother. We're doing everything we can. She shook her head, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. No, Lila. That's not why I came. For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. Then she took a slow, shaky breath and whispered, I came to apologize. The word apologize hung in the air, absurd and fragile. I actually laughed, short, bitter, humorless. You're kidding, I said. After all these years? Her gaze dropped to the floor. I was cruel to you. I shouldn't have been. I saw something in you that scared me, Lila. You had this empathy I didn't understand. And instead of admiring it, I tried to crush it. She met my eyes, tears spilling freely now. You were right to care. You were right to feel. I wanted to hate her for saying it now when it no longer mattered. But part of me, the part that still remembered the sharp scent of her perfume in that old lecture hall, the way her voice softened when she wasn't performing, couldn't hate her completely. Do you know what you did to me? I asked quietly. I almost gave up. I dropped out for a semester. I thought maybe I really was too emotional, too weak. It took everything I had to come back. I know, she said. I followed your work after you left. You became one of the top trauma nurses in California. Every article, every patient review, I read them all. That doesn't erase the past. No, she whispered, shaking her head. It doesn't. But I wish I could. Her voice cracked, and something inside me, something I thought had turned to stone, shifted. I had imagined this moment 100 times. Her regret, her humiliation, her begging. I thought it would feel like victory. Instead, it just hurt. The sound of the intercom broke the silence. Code blue, ICU room 314. Eleanor's eyes widened. That's my mother. I didn't hesitate. Years of training kicked in. Stay here, I ordered, rushing out the door. By the time I reached room 314, the team was already in motion. The monitors were screaming, doctors calling out numbers. I pressed the defibrillator pads to the patient's chest, my voice steady, my movements automatic. Clear. The body jolted once. Twice. Then, a weak pulse returned. When I turned, Eleanor was in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "She's stable," I said, breathing hard. "But it was close." She nodded, lips trembling. "Thank you. Her voice broke. You saved her." That night, when the ward quieted, she came to find me again. Her steps were softer this time, hesitant. She stood in the doorway of the nurse station, eyes glistening. "You always were the one who saved people," she said softly. "Even me." "Don't romanticize it," I replied. "I did my job." But she shook her head. "You don't get it, do you? You were my student once. But you were the one who taught me what it means to truly care." There was a pause long enough for both of us to feel the gravity of everything that had been unsaid between us. "I don't want your pity, Eleanor," I said. "It's not pity," she whispered, stepping closer. "It's love. It always was. I was just too proud to see it." For the first time, I didn't know what to say. The woman who had once made me feel small was now looking at me like I was the only thing that mattered. And maybe, in that moment, I understood that forgiveness wasn't about letting her off the hook, it was about letting myself breathe again. Outside, the dawn began to break over the city. Inside, Eleanor Hayes, the woman who once despised me, sank slowly to her knees, took my trembling hands and whispered, "Please, Lila, forgive me." And as the first light touched her tear-streaked face, I realized that maybe love was never about who had power over whom. Maybe it was about who was brave enough to finally surrender. The next morning felt heavier than any night shift I'd ever worked. The kind of heaviness that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from too many memories clawing their way back into your chest. Eleanor hadn't gone home. I found her in the ICU waiting room, curled up on one of those uncomfortable vinyl chairs, head resting on her knees. She looked nothing like the polished professor who once lectured about emotional control and professional distance. She looked human. And for some reason that broke me more than her tears last night ever could. I stood there for a while just watching her sleep. Her face was pale, framed by strands of dark hair that had escaped their usual neat bun. There was a softness there one I'd never seen when I was her student. Back then, she was made of marble and ambition. Now she looked fragile. Exhausted. Almost. Lost. "Couldn't even go home, huh?" I murmured quietly. She stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. When her gaze met mine, she blinked as if trying to make sure I was real. "Lila," she whispered, voice rough from crying. "You're still here. Someone has to keep an eye on your mother," I said, glancing at the ICU room through the glass. "She's stable for now." Eleanor sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. "You didn't have to stay." I shrugged. "I'm on shift." "You were supposed to clock out at 2. "Yeah, well," I muttered. "Maybe I didn't feel like going home." Her lips curved into a small, tired smile, the kind of smile that could undo all the walls I'd built if I wasn't careful. For a long time we just sat there in silence, the kind that hums quietly between two people with too much history and not enough words. Finally she spoke. "You must think I'm pathetic." "I think you're grieving," I said simply. "There's a difference." She nodded slowly. "You always see what people really feel. Even when they don't want you to." I gave a dry laugh. "That's not always a gift, trust me." Her gaze softened. "It was what I admired about you, even when I pretended I didn't." That word admired landed heavier than it should have. I looked away, pretending to check the monitor readings. Anything to keep my chest from tightening again. Later that morning, after checking on Eleanor's mother, I went to grab coffee from the vending machine. The bitter smell filled the empty hallway as I stirred the cup absently. That's when I heard her behind me. "You still take it black," she said softly. I turned to see her leaning against the wall, arms crossed, a ghost of her old confidence returning. "Still observant, I see," I said. "I remember everything about my students," she said. "Especially the ones who challenged me." "Is that what I did?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Challenge you?" She stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "You made me feel something I wasn't supposed to. You cared too much, and I didn't know how to handle that." I let out a bitter laugh. "So you humiliated me instead?" "Yes," she admitted, without hesitation this time. "Because it was easier than admitting that I envied you." I stared at her, coffee forgotten in my hand. "You envied me?" For what? For your heart, she said simply. You could connect with people in ways I never could. I had knowledge, power, respect, but you had something deeper. You reached people. And she exhaled shakily. I pushed you away because I wanted that kind of light but didn't know how to ask for it. Something in her tone, raw, honest, painfully vulnerable, cracked through my anger. I didn't forgive her, not yet. But I understood her in a way I hadn't before. The next few days blurred into a routine. Eleanor spent every waking hour by her mother's bedside. I did my rounds, charted vitals, administered medications, but somehow, our paths kept crossing. In the cafeteria line. In the elevator. In the quiet moments between patient emergencies. Every time there was this electric awkwardness, like the universe was forcing us to face something unfinished. One afternoon, I found her sitting by her mother's bed, humming softly. The old woman was asleep, her frail hand resting in Eleanor's. There was something heartbreakingly tender about the scene. She used to sing that when I was a kid, Eleanor said without looking at me. I didn't even realize I still remembered the tune. I smiled faintly. You've got a good voice. She laughed under her breath. You're lying. I'm a nurse, I said. I don't lie. Just soften the truth. Her lips curved. Then soften mine. Tell me I wasn't a monster to you back then. I hesitated. You weren't a monster. You were just cold, distant, maybe afraid. Afraid of what? Of caring too much, I said. Same thing you accused me of. She looked up, our eyes locking. There was something magnetic in that moment, an invisible thread pulling us closer. For a second, it felt like the years between us didn't exist. Like the universe had folded time just to bring us back to this fragile point. Then her mother stirred, breaking the spell. That night after my shift, I found a note slipped into my locker. Dinner? Just to talk. I almost threw it away. Almost. But curiosity won. Or maybe deep down something softer did. We met at a small diner near the hospital, the kind with flickering neon lights and worn leather booths. She was already there when I arrived, sitting with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. The sight was strangely domestic, almost intimate. You came, she said quietly as I sat down. Don't make it sound like a date, I teased, though my pulse betrayed me. I wouldn't dare, she said with a hint of a smile. But maybe I wish it was. The words hung in the air like smoke. I didn't respond. I couldn't. We talked for hours about life, about her mother, about the years in between. She told me she'd left Stanford after a nervous breakdown, moved to New York, wrote a few papers that no one cared about, and eventually returned to California to care for her mother. You were right, you know, she said. All that success, the titles, the grants, the recognition, none of it mattered when I couldn't even face myself. I sipped my coffee, studying her. You always looked so sure back then. She laughed softly. Confidence is just fear in a better outfit. That line, sharp and sad all at once, made me smile despite myself. You really have changed. I had to, she said. Otherwise, I'd still be that woman who believed feelings were weaknesses. And now, she whispered, eyes glistening. I know they're the only thing that makes us human. After dinner we walked outside. The city was quiet, the air crisp. She stopped beside my car, her breath visible in the cool night air. Lila, she said, her voice trembling slightly, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that I see you now, who you are, what you've become, and I'm proud. So damn proud. Something inside me shattered a little. Maybe it was the way she said my name, or maybe it was just the truth I'd waited years to hear. I took a slow breath. You hurt me, I said. Deeply. But you also pushed me to become stronger, to believe in my heart, even when people said it made me weak. Her eyes softened. Then maybe the best thing I ever did was fail you. We stood there for a moment, suspended between past and present. Then she reached out hesitantly and brushed her fingers against mine. It was a small touch, fleeting, but it set my whole body on fire. I'll see you tomorrow, she murmured. And just like that, she walked away, leaving me staring after her with a heart that didn't know whether to ache or hope. Days turned into weeks. Eleanor's mother's condition worsened. The treatments weren't working anymore. And even Eleanor, the brilliant academic who once believed every problem had a solution, couldn't deny the inevitable. One evening she found me outside the hospital garden, watching the sunset. "She's tired," I said quietly. "Her vitals are dropping." Eleanor nodded, her voice breaking. "I know. I just don't know how to let her go." I turned to her. "Sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about giving someone peace." Tears filled her eyes. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not," I said gently. "But it's what she deserves. What you deserve too." She really looked at me, and something in her broke open. She stepped closer, her hand trembling as it reached for mine. "Lila, I'm scared." "I know," I whispered, squeezing her hand. "But you're not alone." She leaned into me then, resting her forehead against my shoulder. For the first time since I'd known her, even years ago in those cold lecture halls, she let herself be small, vulnerable, human. And I held her because I couldn't do anything else. Her mother passed away the next morning quietly, peacefully, with Eleanor by her side. I stood a few feet away, watching as she whispered something into her mother's ear, tears falling freely. Afterward, when it was over, she didn't speak. She just walked outside into the hospital courtyard and sank onto a bench. I followed silently. The world felt still. The kind of stillness that only exists after loss. "I thought I was ready," she said finally, voice barely audible. "But I'm not. No one ever is." She looked at me, eyes glistening. "She told me something before she went," she said. "She saw the way I looked at you. And she told me not to waste another lifetime being afraid." The words hit me like a heartbeat, sudden, painful, alive. "What did you say?" I asked quietly. Eleanor smiled faintly through her tears. "I told her I'd try." And for the first time since that terrible day years ago, when she broke my heart in front of everyone, I believed her. That night, after the funeral arrangements were made, she showed up at my apartment. No makeup, no mask, just Eleanor, raw and real. "I don't know how to do this," she said softly, standing in my doorway. "I don't know how to be the person you deserve." I looked at her for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Then let's figure it out together." She exhaled shakily, and when she stepped into the room, it felt like the past finally exhaled too. We didn't talk much after that. Words felt too small. Instead, we sat on the couch side by side, watching the city lights outside my window. Her hand found mine, hesitant at first, then sure. For the first time, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was full of everything we'd lost, and everything we might still find. As the night deepened, she whispered, "You know what's funny? I used to think love was something you could study, analyze, predict. But it's not." "What is it then?" I asked. She smiled, leaning her head on my shoulder. "It's something you live. Something that terrifies you. And saves you at the same time." I turned to look at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the professor who once judged me, or the woman begging for forgiveness. I saw someone real. Someone who had fallen, broken, and was still brave enough to love again. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The weeks after Eleanor's mother's passing felt strangely quiet. There was no more beeping from the ICU monitors, no hushed medical updates whispered in corridors, just a kind of emptiness that settled between us. Yet somehow in that silence we found a fragile rhythm. Eleanor stayed in Los Angeles longer than she'd planned. She said it was to settle her mother's affairs, but I think we both knew there was more to it than paperwork and old memories. Sometimes she came to the hospital to bring me lunch, sometimes just to sit by the fountain in the courtyard, where she'd wait for my break. Every time I saw her there, her hair tied loosely, coffee in hand, watching me with that soft, almost shy smile, I felt something quiet shift inside me. The woman who had once made me feel invisible was now waiting, patiently, for me to see her. And somehow I did. One evening after a long shift, she was still sitting there, even though the sky had already turned violet and the air carried the chill of early winter. "You're going to freeze out here," I said, pulling my jacket tighter. She looked up at me, her breath visible in the cool air. "I don't mind. You always walk this way when you clock out." "You were waiting for me?" "Maybe." I rolled my eyes but couldn't hide the small smile that tugged at my lips. "You really don't give up easily, do you?" She shook her head, a soft laugh escaping her. "Not when it comes to something that finally feels right." There was a weight behind her words, the kind that made my pulse skip. I looked away, suddenly aware of how close she was, how the air between us seemed to hum. Eleanor, I started, but she cut me off gently. You don't have to say anything, she said. I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for. But these past few weeks, being around you, seeing who you've become, it's changed me. I don't want to lose that again. Her voice trembled, but her eyes stayed steady. I don't want to lose you again. And that was the first time she said it, not as an apology, not as a confession, but as a truth. That night, I let her walk me home. The streets were quiet, bathed in the warm glow of streetlights. She told me stories about her mother, about the garden she loved, the pies she used to bake on Sundays, the way she used to hum the same lullaby Eleanor had once sung at her bedside. When we reached my building, I hesitated at the door. She stood close enough for me to feel her breath. I should go, I said softly. Of course, she whispered, but didn't move. We stood there for what felt like forever, two people caught in the gravity of something neither of us could name. Then slowly, she reached up and brushed a strand of hair from my face. You still do that thing, she murmured. What thing? Bite your lip when you're nervous. I smiled despite myself. Old habits. Her eyes softened. I missed that. And before I could think, before the past or the fear or the logic could interfere, I leaned forward and kissed her. It wasn't a grand cinematic kiss. It was hesitant, trembling, full of years of pain and forgiveness and longing we'd both tried to bury. But it was real. When we finally pulled away, she whispered against my lips, I've been waiting to do that for years. I could only whisper back, then don't wait anymore. After that night, something between us changed. Not suddenly, more like a sunrise, slow and quiet, light creeping into corners we didn't realize had gone dark. We started spending more time together, morning walks, lazy dinners, sometimes just sitting in silence. She helped me paint my apartment, though she ended up with more paint on her hands than the walls. I helped her sort through her mother's old journals, and we found a photograph of Eleanor as a child, gap-toothed and smiling, holding a sunflower bigger than her head. She looked at it for a long time, then said quietly, I used to think that little girl was gone forever. She's still here, I said. You just stopped listening to her. Her eyes glistened. And you brought her back. I didn't know what to say. So instead I reached out and took her hand. She held it tightly, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. But healing isn't linear. Some days were harder. Sometimes she woke up crying, nightmares pulling her back to her mother's final breaths. Sometimes I found myself pulling away, afraid of what it meant to love someone who had once been my pain. One night after a long shift, I found her sitting on my balcony, staring at the city lights below. Her eyes were distant, her hands gripping the railing. You okay? I asked gently. She didn't look at me. I keep thinking about how much time I wasted. How many years I spent hiding behind pride and fear. And now, I'm scared it's too late. I sat beside her. It's not too late. She shook her head. You say that like you believe it. I do, I said. Because I'm still here. That made her look at me, really look. Then, quietly, she leaned in and rested her head against my shoulder. Thank you, she whispered, for not walking away. Funny, I said softly. You said that once when you gave me my final grade in your class. She laughed quietly. I remember. You stayed after everyone left. You were so angry at me. I was, I admitted. Because I thought you hated me. I didn't, she said. I was just terrified that I felt too much for you. That silence again, thick, tender, unspoken. Do you still? I asked. Her answer came as a whisper. Every second. Months passed. Spring came to Los Angeles, soft rain, blooming magnolias, the scent of new beginnings. Eleanor decided to stay permanently. She resigned from her university position and joined a research team that worked with trauma recovery, using her psychology background to train young doctors and nurses. Sometimes she'd visit my floor, bringing coffee and pretending it was purely professional, even though everyone could see the way her eyes followed me. The gossip spread fast. Hospitals are like small towns that never sleep. But for once I didn't care. Neither did she. One afternoon during a rare day off, we drove up the coast, windows down. Music playing, sunlight painting her face gold. She looked free in a way I'd never seen before. At a red light, she turned to me and said, Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't been such an idiot back then? I smiled. Maybe we wouldn't be here now. She nodded. Maybe we had to break first so we could find each other whole. There was a pause, then she added quietly, "You healed me, Lila." I reached over and touched her hand on the steering wheel. "No," I said. "You healed yourself. I just reminded you how." Her eyes softened, glimmering like the ocean outside. "Then let me remind you too that you deserve love that stays." We spent the weekend in a small beach cabin she'd rented, a quiet, wooden place with white curtains and the constant sound of waves outside. It was the first time we allowed ourselves to just be, without the ghosts of our pasts pressing in. We cooked, we laughed, we danced barefoot on the sand. She read me poetry by candlelight, her voice low and warm, and I realized I was falling in love with her all over again. This time without anger or resentment. That night, lying beside her, she whispered into the dark, "I used to believe love was supposed to be flawless. Perfect. But now I think it's supposed to be forgiving." I smiled, tracing my fingers along her wrist. "And maybe a little messy." She laughed quietly. "God, yes. Especially with us." The next morning, I woke to the sound of the ocean and the smell of coffee. She was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunrise. When I stepped outside, she turned to me, eyes soft. "I was thinking," she said, "about everything. About how people come back into your life when you least expect it." I sat beside her. "You think that's fate?" "I think it's mercy," she said. "The universe's way of giving you another chance to do right by someone you wronged." I looked at her for a long time, the woman who had once broken me, now sitting there like she'd been rebuilt from the inside out. "Eleanor," I said softly. "You already did." Her lips trembled into a smile, and she reached for my hand. Weeks later, on the anniversary of her mother's passing, she asked me to visit the hospital garden with her. The same place where we'd first really talked. She had brought a small bouquet of sunflowers, her mother's favorite. We laid them by the fountain. The air was cool, gentle. She took a deep breath and whispered, "Thank you, Mom, for pushing me toward the one person who taught me how to live again." Then she turned to me, eyes shimmering with emotion. "Lila, I know this isn't some fairy tale. We've both seen too much to believe in perfect endings. But I do believe in us." My heart ached in the best way. "So do I." She took both my hands, then the same way she once did in that sterile hallway, but this time it wasn't desperation. It was peace. "Then let's start from here," she said. "No past. No titles. Just you and me." I smiled, tears pricking my eyes. "You and me." She leaned in, and when our lips met, it wasn't the fragile, uncertain kiss of before. It was steady, deep, full of everything we'd lost and found again. And as the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting gold across our faces, I realized that maybe love doesn't always arrive when you're ready for it. Sometimes it shows up years later, bruised, imperfect, but still beautiful. Sometimes it kneels. Sometimes it forgives. And sometimes it simply stays. That night, as we lay in bed, the city lights flickering through the window, Eleanor whispered, "You know, the girl I once called too emotional saved my life." I smiled sleepily. "And the woman who once tried to crush me ended up teaching me how to forgive." We both laughed softly. And in that quiet, in that warmth, I realized that this was what love was meant to be, not perfect, not easy, but real. The kind that doesn't fade. The kind that begins where pain once lived. The kind that stays even after the storm. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.